Hello everyone and welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. Hope you guys enjoyed that first segment. Sauce Gardner truly has a fantastic career ahead of him, and he already has the stats to back him up, and the pundits behind him as well. But we are transitioning to Devon Witherspoon. But before we get into that, I want to remind you yet again that if you do feel so inclined, please consider leaving a tip or donation at the link gsmc.cloud. It is a huge support to both me, my fellow podcasters, and ultimately the network as a whole. Without further ado, let's jump into why I think this next young corner is so special, because he plays for that team right there. Devon Witherspoon. Oops. I don't have a graphic for Devon Witherspoon, as it turns out, but no matter, because I'm very passionate about him anyways, and we don't need a graphic to back him up. Now, when Devon Witherspoon came into the league, number 5 overall pick, he was more seen as a guy who was a developmental prospect. Tariq Woolen already had exceeded expectations at the corner position, and Seattle really liked what they saw in Mike Jackson at the cornerback position, so they were saying, okay, if we draft Devon Witherspoon, he can be a nice little piece, but he will mainly play the nickel role. We'll use him where we can. But that was not the case, because he had one of the best rookie seasons. He earned a Pro Bowl nod. He had 16 passes defended last year. He was an incredible all-around corner last year that really contributed to every level of the defense. But I still think his role can expand. And with the new defensive mind in Mike Macdonald as a head coach and Aiden Durd really preaching that communication levels through all three levels of the defense, I think Devon Witherspoon's time to shine is going to be very soon. So without further ado, let's jump right into what made Devon Witherspoon really pop and stand out in his rookie year. 115.4 fantasy points last year, 56 solo tackles, 8 tackles for loss, 3 sacks. Of course, the 16 passes defended, 1 interception. A beautiful interception returning for a touchdown against the New York Giants. I live in the tri-state area. I always have to mention them. But let's get into what makes Devon Witherspoon such an electrifying player and why he hasn't even reached his peak yet. So last year, he came into Pete Carroll's system as someone who was seen kind of as like, not exactly, but almost similar to what Jamal Adams was for Seattle, where he was more used like a blitzer, kind of scheme coverage guy who fit in where he could. He's still listed as a nickelback in Seattle's depth charts, but ultimately, when I look at it, and I look at the way Seattle want to play, especially if they maintain at least some of their zone coverages, then Spoon best fits that mold. I think that Spoon can step into passing lanes, he can disrupt the rhythm of opposing offenses, and he really is someone who is willing to compete at any given stage. It's the reason that at such a young age he's already 9th on ESPN's best corners list. I think that the new additions at different coaching spots in Mike Macdonald and Aiden Durd will really help him as well. And we can already start to see it as he's becoming one of the vocal leaders in that secondary grouping that they really want. What I love about Seattle's secondary is that you have guys who have been kind of tossed around the league, like a Michael Jackson started off in Detroit, not really appreciated, but last year really was one of his breakout years. Then you have a guy in Tariq Woolen who was the first developmental prospect before Devon Witherspoon, and he just surged into the league. Last year, kind of a down year for him, but I still think he has that potential. He just needs to get back into being that willful, amenable player in that corner group. And then you have the 2 safeties, Julian Love and Quandre Diggs as well as Michael Jackson coming from Detroit. always a solid player. And then Julian Love, another fantastic player last year who's really going to grow yet again in the system. So when I look at Seattle's secondary, it's definitely one of their strengths of this 3-4 defense. And there definitely seems to be a role for Spoon, because ultimately I still think that when I think about what both McDonald and Dird bring to this defense is the aggression tied in with communication. Because as a Seattle fan, having grown up with the Legion of Boom, where every single player in that defense knew where the others was going to be and knew what their own tendencies were and how they fit into the scheme, and how that has declined through the years as the Seattle football has drastically changed, I think that Aiden Dird and Mike McDonald bring that freshness. They see the potential in this defense. The secondary is a young secondary that they can build around. You have two stalwarts for many years to come at the cornerback position in Reek Woolen and Devon Witherspoon, should he start, which I think he will. You have two fantastic safeties in Quandre Dix and Julian Love, who still will stick around. And your D-line is constantly improving. You added Draymond Jones last year, Leonard Williams this year. And you really have guys who, if they maintain their health, can become a coherent defense. But what they were lacking was where they could fit in. And so that sense of communication, that sense of holding each other accountable comes into play here. And why I think Devon Witherspoon is such a wild card, especially in IDP leagues, is because Seattle, ironically enough, might not use him as much. They might still view him as a utility guy, but when he comes in, he's going to be the force of this defense. He's going to be an integral part of everything that runs through him. And so when Spoon is in, I think defenses then have to shift their attention, because let's say Seattle maintains some of their zone tendencies, because that's always been one of the base defenses that Seattle ran in terms of their secondary. Zone, zone, zone. It was always a much softer zone. But the way Devon Witherspoon interprets that zone is such a special aspect of his game that I don't think many people realize. And it's how he gets into passing lanes so quickly. I think that should Mike McDonald or Aiden Dird want to rely more on man-to-man, he fits that landscape well as well. And I think that ultimately Devon Witherspoon is going to eventually become and supplant Reek Woolen as the leader of the corners and ultimately the secondary as a whole, because, like I said, when you are given the freedom to communicate with other players on the field, then you know, okay, maybe I can fill another role, and maybe I can discover something about my style of play that I haven't before. And that's what they want out of Spoon. His rookie year was such a fantastic foundational year for him to set his mark as someone to be reckoned with as a secondary player. But now it's time for him to assume the mantle as a full-on Seattle cornerback. And what that means is you cover every blade of grass. You live the philosophy of understanding others' style of play. And you ultimately give in to the culture as well. It's no longer, every man for themselves and no one is talking to each other. No one's understanding the set play. It's now coming down to hard tacks here, because discipline has been Seattle defense's main weakness. They lose it in certain moments of the game where they could have taken over, and now that Mike McDonald and Aiden Dird are in, they're going to immediately diagnose that and say, we have to be better in these situations. And so what that means for Spoon is that ultimately he can't look past what Reek Woolen does. He can't look past what Julian Love does, and he can't look past what Quandre Diggs does. And if we're talking about former Seattle defenses, we're talking about guys like Richard Sherman, we're talking about guys like Cam Chancellor, the reason they were so physical and the reason they imposed their will on opposing offenses was because they understood how to. They understood the moments where the offense's guards were down. They understood the moments where one of them said, okay, you can take over this play. And ultimately they understood at all three levels of that defense what their roles were. And that's what made them so dominant. And looking at this Seattle defense this year, they can immediately get back to that sentiment. They have the depth up front now. They may not have the most attracting depth up front, but hey, Michael Bennett and Cliff Averill weren't household names either. They became household names. And so, when I look at the secondary, and I look at the youth, especially in Devon Witherspoon, and I look at his rookie season especially, I can't not say that this guy has a huge future ahead of him, especially in IDP leagues as well. When I look at both Sauce and Spoon, hardly anything separates them. But Spoon definitely has the advantage of being in a system that you can see two sides of the coin. You can see the side where he just plays freely, and you can see the side where he plays within himself and the system. And so, I think both of these guys who I talked about will improve drastically, but I think Spoon is in a very advantageous position to have an opportunity that he can't ignore. But that will just about do it for both of these young players. Coming next, we have another secondary player, a little less younger, but still one of the better ones in the league. Kind of going under people's radars, but I truly appreciate him. We'll be right back with him after the break on the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast.
Looking for your